We'll give everybody 30 seconds to get logged in and ready to go. Today, we are going to be looking at the modern campaigns. So how do politicians campaign to win elections? That is going to be the zoom in topic of today's lesson. The Desmos is in the chat. Feel free to log on to that as soon as you get it. I have 15 of us on Desmos, so I should have 2 more. So please make sure you are logged into Desmos. Today is a pretty normal day. Do now, we're actually going to be watching a short video from PBS, and then you're going to read one document, and as we have this discussion on how modern campaigns work. And yes, it's going to be a pretty normal day. Okay, I am going to restrict us to the do now as a review for the IA next week. You have 6 minutes to apply these definitions to the correct answer. 5 minutes. Actually, I'm going to give us 6. 6 minutes. Make sure you also thoroughly explain your answer. Go ahead and get started. You should be restricted onto the do now screen. Chat me if you have any questions. Two and a half more minutes to finish up on the do now. Make sure you're explaining why you chose that definition. one more minute to finish up, and then we'll come back together to review.
Miss Wire, can you check my answers? I'm sorry.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and come back together to review your do now. I am going to briefly name what key term applies to each scenario. And then if you have any questions, we can review. Okay. So for number one, prior to the 2016 election, the American Medical Association, an interest group comprised of medical professionals, would not endorse a candidate who supported marijuana legislation because of marijuana's negative impacts on public health. That is a representative government. Number two, in 2016, Massachusetts held referendum where citizens could vote on whether they wanted to legalize marijuana while regulating and taxing the products similar to alcohol. That is popular sovereignty. And finally, obviously, in 2018, there are 10 states with full marijuana legislation. 20 states have decriminalized marijuana, and in 20 states, marijuana is fully illegal. That is federalism. Any questions on why those terms apply to those scenarios? You can raise your hand or drop them in the chat.
Me too.
15 more seconds to send out those questions if you have any.
Mine's are all correct, right? Representative, federal.
Okay, we will go ahead and get started. Unfortunately, because of school Wi-Fi, we cannot watch this video for the hooks. So whenever you're going back through this Desmos later, this screen will obviously be blank because I cannot play that video. So we're actually just going to go straight into the documents. Today, our main question is, to what extent are modern campaigns, sorry, I'm going to let people in from the waiting room. No, you're totally fine. To what extent are modern campaigns a truly democratic process? So that is what we are going to be zooming in on today. And our first document is actually going to be a PBS NewsHour special. It's about 7 minutes long. There is a spot in your Desmos to take notes. You can also choose to take notes on a separate piece of paper if that's what you would prefer. Just make sure you're taking notes and follow along so that way you can use the video as evidence in your response. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And again, please make sure you're also taking notes. We're going to watch the first 7 minutes of this or so, which is almost the whole video. Okay, I'm going to share my computer sound. And Isis, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it?
Journalist Sasha Eisenberg has spent 2 years examining the fundamentals of elections.
Again, make sure you're taking notes.
From micro-targeted polling to the on-the-ground tactics operatives deploy to make sure people show up at the polls. His new book, The Victory Lab, The Secret Science of Winning Campaigns, takes readers into campaign war rooms for an inside look at the data driving some of the political decisions. He joins us now. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Hari.
So you describe almost a scientific revolution that's happening in campaigns, and you say there are experiments happening now on who votes and why that are similar to drug trials. How is that?
This is basically randomized control trials. So instead of randomly assigning people into groups and giving them a different pharmaceutical and leaving a control group or having a placebo, people are sending mail or online ads or robocalls, randomly assigning them and then going out and measuring the impact, either looking at who voted after the election to see if it affected turnout, or polling before and after to see whether it changed people's opinions.
It used to be that polling was the science of campaigns, and now there's so much more behavioral science and prediction and analytics that's going into it. When did that happen?
So, in the week of 2000, I think a lot changes. You have all sorts of new data coming from the commercial world that's making its way into politics. You have academics in political science discovering field experiments. Political science had never spent anywhere near as much time as some of the other social sciences actually testing things in the field. People realize they can run these experiments and see what actually moves voters. And when you start to realize that a lot of things we see in polls or in focus groups don't really live up to the way that people experience politics in the real world.
So this combination of commercial data and political data, give me an example.
Well, you know, for you, Hari, you're a registered voter, so right away I know on your voter registration record if you're affiliated with a party, which elections you voted in. If you vote in primaries, I know your date of birth, so I know your age, I know your gender. In some states, I know your race. I have all sorts of political information, maybe from other groups or campaigns that have contacted you in the past. So I know that somebody from John Kerry's campaign knocked on your door 8 years ago and you told them you weren't interested in voting, or you told them you care about the environment. All of that is in a database somewhere. Maybe, you know, Planned Parenthood knocked on your door, or the NRA too, and that information exists somewhere. And then there's all this information that's been gathered by commercial data warehouses, from magazine subscriptions, the things you put on warranty forms. A lot of it first gathered by people who are creating credit ratings. They obviously want to know as much about you as possible and develop predictions. What's happened in the political world is people are doing statistical models with the same goal. So instead of predicting whether you're likely to default on your loan or pay off your bill on time or run up $500 on your credit card in a given month, they're trying to predict how likely are you to vote in November. Who are you likely to vote for? What issues are you likely to care about?
So give me an example of how I'm being, well, the politicians might say targeted, but a voter might feel manipulated.
Yeah, so, you know, after they've done these statistical models and are sort of moving you into one of a few categories, you're somebody they want to persuade, or you're somebody they want to turn out. The science on turnout has gotten a lot better. We don't know a whole lot more about what makes you change your mind or how you change your mind than we did a decade ago. We know a lot more about what can motivate you to actually cast a ballot. And increasingly, it's informed by behavioral psychology. And so the most effective tool we've ever seen documented was in this experiment in Michigan in 2006, where some political scientists worked with a pretty quirky mail vendor in Lansing to send voters copies of their own voter history. So this says, in the last 8 elections, you voted in the 2010 general election, you didn't vote in the school board election. And it says, here are your neighbors' vote histories, and has a bunch of people on your block and whether they voted in certain elections. And it said, there's an election coming up. After the election, we're going to send everybody an updated set. It had a sort of astronomical impact compared to any other tool for getting out the vote. It's what psychologists call social pressure. And people have been sort of working with this idea that voters are concerned with sort of their identity around voting time.
So let's talk a little bit about this campaign now. There's so much talk of the huge amount of money that's being spent, $1 per voter figures, right, especially in battleground states. How much of those dollars are spent on traditional kind of negative campaign ads, and how much of it is spent doing this kind of research that you're talking about?
I mean, I think increasingly campaigns are recognizing the value of doing turnout as opposed to just persuasion, partially because the science has gotten better. A lot of the research isn't necessarily taking place in campaigns. Campaigns still are not likely to spend $1 now for something that'll yield a lesson in December. What they are doing is insights that are coming out of academia or coming out of sort of some of these research institutes that have popped up in politics are affecting everything that goes on the ground. And so, you know, when you get contacted the weekend before the election by somebody doing get out the vote for the Obama campaign, they're almost certainly going to ask you, what time do you plan to vote on election day? They're not going to write down the answer, but it's because they've learned through years of experiments that asking people what time they plan to vote, where they're going to come from beforehand, what they'll be doing that day, makes them develop a plan, which is a sort of behavioral mechanism that actually makes somebody more likely to follow through on an action after they've sort of thought through how they're going to do it.
So both of these campaigns seem to be spending a tremendous amount of money on going after either the off-the-grid or on-demand voter, meaning the person who's not watching traditional TV. They might have cut the cord for cable. They're only watching online ads.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things that's happened this cycle is campaigns are finally able to sort of merge or sync up your offline political identity and your online political behaviors. And so there have been lots of analytics, basically since 2004. In the online world, but they sort of existed in isolation there. So if you signed up on a website, then I was pretty good at being able to track how you moved around that website. But the only things people did online were sign up to volunteer or give money. You still vote in the real world. You vote in the precinct where you live. Your registration is tethered to an address, and we never knew whether the person who signed up on a list was the same person who was registered at a given address. That's changed now through cookies online. Campaigns are able to link a voter file record to somebody moving around the internet, and it's giving them the ability to sort of sync up their interactions with you online to what they're doing when a volunteer calls you or knocks on your door, or they're sending you direct mail at your house.
And you also, in the book, get into this cat and mouse game that essentially every campaign learns from its failures and moves forward. And whether it's what Karl Rove did in 2000 or 2004, I mean, the Democrats respond and then the Republicans respond again and again.
Yeah, I mean, learn from their failures or overreact from their losses, probably a little of both. But definitely the 2004 Bush reelection scared Democrats like nothing before, partially for things that the Republicans had really figured out, and partially for a mythology that had emerged around Rove and some of the people in Bush's world for things that they had done. But I actually think that and I sort of tell the story of 2004 in the book, and I think that the parties are actually far closer in terms of where they were in unlocking the underlying secret of micro-targeting, which is that you can predict what an individual is going to do. One of the advantages Bush had in 2004, which Obama has in 2008, is that when you're a presidential reelection, you have several years to sort of build a system where people actually will follow through on things. Mm-hmm. And the Bush campaign was far better at implementing it in their day-to-day operations than Kerry ever was.
All right. The book is called...
Okay, take 30 seconds to go ahead and finish jotting down any last notes. So that was half of today's documents for the day. So you're now going to have 6 minutes to read document 2, which is slide 6. You now have access. 6 minutes to read this document, and then we'll come back together to discuss to what extent are these modern campaigns truly a democratic process. And we'll talk about what is a democratic process as well. 6 minutes to read this document. Go ahead and get started. Make sure you have an annotation at the end so I can follow along and see what you are thinking. 3.5 more minutes. Two more minutes. Two more minutes. And again, please make sure you're putting in an annotation at the end so I can see what you guys are pulling away from the document. Thirty more seconds to finish up those annotations. Before we jump into discourse, I want to make sure you guys have the opportunity to reflect with the correct framing process. So when we talk about the democratic process, we think of elections and how does somebody get elected? And when the founders created this idea of a representative democracy, as we know, democracies are as old as Greece. But when we think about a democracy, it's typically a clash of ideas. So two political parties coming together to debate over what they think is the best way to run the government. And then the people vote on that and decide if it's correct or not. And so it's usually framed as like the people have having a say in the government and forming the government around what they want and representing their ideals. So with these two documents in mind I lost my question. To what extent are these campaigns actually a democratic process? So to what extent are these modern campaigns that have all of these systems, are they truly representing democracy in the fair and just election, that type of way? Okay, take 90 seconds to reflect on this question in Desmos. On the last slide, it is open for you to be able to reflect. Take 90 seconds to reflect, and then we'll come back together. Fifteen more seconds to finish up. Great, let's go ahead and start off discourse as always, because you guys have shown yourselves to be models of discourse. I am going to ask a couple people to get us started off. After those people get the conversation going, feel free to unmute and just jump into the discussion. So that way we can keep it natural and keep it flowing. If people do not jump in or raise their hands, I will obviously call on people. So, to what extent are modern campaigns truly a democratic process? Can I hear from Nazaya, then Ariana, and then Lauren? So again, Nazaya, Ariana, Lauren.
I said the modern campaigns are not truly democratic, well, in my opinion, because I feel like the process, when you think about it, how they're trying to reach people in the reading and what he had just stated in the video, they were both talking about how like they were curating these campaigns, mails, and like randomizing everything. So it wasn't truly going out to the people with this political party and their ideals. So they were just trying to reach people. So they weren't trying to change opinions, change what these people wanted, or speak to the people for their opinions. They were morally just doing it just to reach out to these people because they wanted to see if they would come to the voting polls, but they weren't even having an influence or an impact on anyone.
I agree with Nazaya. Like to add that I feel like they're trying to get pretty much trying to get data. They're trying to just see how many people will come out, and I feel like they're just on some like just mainly trying to rely on influencing people to things, not really trying to tell them data or inform them about anything. So yeah, I feel like now campaigning isn't. They don't really go through the whole democratic process.
Nazaya and Ariana kind of already said what I said, but I just said that the campaigning process isn't really fair or like free. They kind of put a lot like, well, the guy said that they use tremendous amounts of money just to campaign an idea or try to manipulate someone to agree with that group. And then when they try to do it, it's like a 50-50 chance that that person might not change their vote at all. And then it also states like at the top of the reading that the ostensible goal is to just persuade people to vote for a particular candidate. It's not really like allowing these people to actually get a thought of their own. It's basically just trying to influence them or just constantly, I don't know how to say like harass them, I guess. Yeah, to just change their vote.
Thank you so much for getting us started. Again, feel free to jump in either through raising your hand or just unmute. Erica, I saw your hand shoot up.
I understand what's being said, and I agree with what Nazaya said that campaigning should be more targeted towards a specific person. But I feel like this process, it isn't like necessarily forcing anybody to do anything. It's giving that information out and letting the people choose. And I think that's what makes it democratic. I feel like where corruption can slip in is where politicians advertise something that they don't truly believe in or whatever. But this whole idea of giving the voters as much information as possible and like letting them decide, I feel like that's democratic.
You guys can just jump in. Thank you, Naisha, for raising your hand though, but feel free just to jump in.
I agree with Erica. I think that it's still democracy, just like more in your face because they're more up, like they're coming to like your door and stuff like that. And the guy Sasha, he had stated that it's the purpose is to persuade or turn out, and so they're using like subtle manipulation by like asking you like planning questions and things like that, which is basically campaigning, just it's more upfront and personalized rather than you seeing it in like a commercial or ad on like your phone or whatever.
Yeah.
I agree with Naija, and I think that basically it's like the government basically stalks you and like sees everything that you do, and then they use your habits to try to like manipulate your vote and get you to vote or whatever.
I agree. And even if they're not persuading them to vote that specific way, I feel like putting that information out there encourages more people to vote and increases the voice. And I think that's really important too.
I'm just gonna jump in real quick. I agree, and I support what all of you guys are saying. I think you guys are definitely thinking about this in the right critical way. Going back to document 2, does this actually work? Does this actually get new voters? You want to either raise your hand or unmute and jump in. Montana, go ahead.
I don't think it works because like from experience or whatever, like this time around when I voted, like I saw the things on Instagram and all like the ads or whatever, and I honestly just ignored it because it was just like annoying at that point, and I felt like it was kind of like scamish. It felt scamish, so it just doesn't work.
Aaron, you can go ahead and jump in.
I won't say it's the best option. Well, best way to like promote voters, but it's a way of gaining voters because at the end of the day, they're not forcing the voters to vote into a party that they don't like. They're just trying to gain the Republicans or Democratic voters or whatever party they and to vote for that party to gain more voters because at the end of the day, the people have the voice to vote for what kind of party they want and what kind of laws they want to be passed. They're just trying to like get more voters. Um, over the years, because we know that like over the years people are being less active in the political system. So this is a way of like getting more people, especially like the younger millennials, because that's where like social media generates instead of like the old people.
Awesome. And thank you, Naisha, for putting that piece of evidence in the chat. That was what I was looking for. Looking at the piece of evidence that Naisha put in the chat, is this kind of campaigning good? We know it's effective because they get people to vote, specifically these types of people, but is this the right way to campaign? There are reasons on both sides, of course.
I say somewhat no, because you're targeting people that you are guaranteed to win. Like you're guaranteed these votes. You're not actually branching out towards people who are hesitant to vote or are unsure about where they should lean. So instead of persuading others to be more included in the democratic process, you're just reaching out towards the guaranteed voters just for them to turn out so you can get a win.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a good mix of both impersonal and technical outreach and personal and in-person outreach, because you hit people who don't usually vote and who don't really usually get information about campaigns, and keep people who you already know is going to vote updated with what's going on.
Is there a way to fix this? Is this type of as we've seen, this is a new way to campaign. Campaigning like this has lasted only 20 out of almost over 250 years. So this isn't a common trend in American history. Is there a way to fix it? Or is there a better way to do it? Take 30 seconds to think on it. Is there a way that we can fix this type of campaigning? Awesome. And go ahead and jump in if you thought of anything.
Well, to fill the silence, I can just say exactly what I just said, which is having a good mix of both impersonal and personal campaigns is essential.
Is there a way to convince people that won't vote to vote?
Nope. Give them $100. I feel like they should actually use the money that they're funding to put.
I won't say there's a way, but I can say that maybe they need to see something bad happen in the government to say, okay, my voice need to be heard, because I think with the Washington riot thing with Republicans, I think that actually gained more voters, and therefore I've seen that more Republicans, well, people in the Senate are saying that it's like really bad, and that like honestly switch their minds and stuff like that. So they can also switch parties and as people who don't usually vote in politics.
Just to jump in and use 2020 as an example, as you guys remember, we were on pins and needles waiting to see who won. Like, it was pretty close. But Joe Biden still got more votes than any president in history. When you think about like numbers, not percentage, but like he had millions more votes than anybody else has had in the past, which means that more people voted in 2020 than ever before. Madison, can you unmute and share that?
I said because it was such a big controversial topic. Oh, another thing is the media, because it was so like it was in the media up for a long time, way before the election. So everyone had input.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been talking about how this use of media in the elections may not be fair or correct, but it worked. It just may not have worked in the way that we thought it would. Awesome. I love what I'm seeing in the chat as well. We're going to go ahead and pause there so that you guys can have plenty of time in the exit ticket. It is 2 multiple choice questions and a quick brief response question. So that is open for you guys. Once you complete the exit ticket and I see that you've turned in on Google Classroom, you guys will be free to leave the Zoom. As a reminder, there is homework posted to Google Classroom that is due Monday. Today is Monday. That is due Wednesday. So please make sure you are completing that homework so you can be prepared for that class. If you are not, you'll get a 0 in gradebook, which would suck as quarter 3 is almost done. And also, it should not take long. Okay, and the exit ticket is open. Once I see that you've done all parts to the exit ticket, and you turn in on Google Classroom, you're free to go.